We live in a world where science is really everywhere. Now, I don't mean that it's happening around us, but what I mean is that there's a lot of things that just talk about science and have science going on. So I'm going to go to my go-to this morning. I try not to include a sports reference every single sermon, but there is a show on ESPN called Sports Science. And one of the things they do is the different science that takes place within the sports. Do we have any golfers here in the room? All right, so this one was comparing a modern club, energy transfer efficiency between a modern club and the club that was used, 34 years ago. And you see the difference of how much more energy is transferred with a modern club as compared to an old club. So that was the science that they did with that one. Another one they did was on Kyrie Irving and how quick he was on the basketball court and how they compared him to a copperhead strike. If you know anything about Kyrie Irving, he went to the best colleges of all time, Duke University. But again, it was sharing how quick he was and how quick that was to that. So again, this is just to break the ice to realize that science is everywhere, and everything can be broken down into a science standpoint. But as we see this morning, we're going to begin with the framework for where did modern science ultimately come from? Where did it come from, and what that means for us? So modern scientists would say it began like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what did he create? Well, on day 1, earth, space, time, and light. Day 2, the atmosphere. Day 3, dry land and plants. Give me a science name for dry land and plants. Earth science? Failed that one. No, I didn't. Barely passed that one. What's another word for plant science? Botany, okay. So again, the Bible is not a scientific textbook, but science was taking place as God created the heavens and the earth. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Give me a scientific name for that. Astronomy. Okay, awesome. Day 5, sea and flying creatures. Any science names that come with that? This dude's a science master. You should be teaching this, dude. 6, land, animals, and man. And so we see here again that science is taking place. When I think about the mountains being formed, right? What's that science? With rocks. Geology. All right? So all this science was taking place. Although creation is not a science story or a science textbook, science was happening from the beginning. And in these parts, there's 2 big things that stuck out to the modern scientists in Genesis chapter 1. It was these 2 things. It was to fill the earth and govern it. That as man, they were called to be fruitful and to multiply and to govern over the earth. And in Genesis 1:31, God looked over all he had made and said it was very good. And that this was a good thing to govern in life. The things that were created. The group Answers in Genesis says this: it is because God exists that science is possible. The reason the universe is orderly and logical is because a logical God has imposed order on his creation. It's because God created our minds that we are able to discover the laws of science that he created. So the thing I began to realize really quick when I was diving into this issue of Christianity and science was that at the end of the day, everything came back to worldview. About 5, 6, 7 weeks ago, we talked a lot about worldview. Remember, if you were here in service, we had the 3D glasses, and we talked about how worldview is how we see life around us, how we make sense of reality around us. It's a combination of what we believe to be true. What you believe to be true is the driving force behind the emotions, decisions, action, and it affects everything in our life. And so what I began to see was that what you make of science has a lot to do with your worldview or how you view the world around you. This can go for anything, really. Maybe with the recent things happening in the world around us, with abortion, ultimately at the end of the day, it comes down to a worldview. How you make sense of the world and reality around you. You posting something on Facebook with this pithy statement, I'm not sure is going to get to the heart of a worldview issue in people's lives. Worldview. We're going to see more of that as we dive in. So here was a bit of the worldview that the modern scientists held on to. The modern scientists started with a belief that the material world was good because God had made it good. It's important to notice that because there are some groups or places in the world that did not believe the material world was good. That was a starting point. The founders of modern science believe that the universe is regular, orderly, and rational because God is personal, rational, and faithful. Modern scientists believe that the behavior of the material world was able to be understood because God has made us in His image and given us a mind to think and discover. So ultimately, modern science is discovering what God has already placed in this world. Discovering what God has put there. Jonas Kepler says this: the chief aim of all investigations of the external world should be to discover the rational order and harmony which has been imposed on it by God, and which He revealed to us in the language of mathematics. The Bible would say something like this: the heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display His craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make Him known. Science is a deeper way to know God, to know who He is. And it says the things that He created actually speak for Him. So to say, here He is. They speak without a word or a sound. Their voice is never heard, yet their message has gone throughout all the earth, to their words to all the world. So we're going to say, I keep on using this word modern science. But what does that mean? So we're going to talk a little bit about that to give us a better understanding of this age and of this day and age of modern science. Science ultimately is about observation and prediction. It's a framework and methodology used to explain how something happened, how it could happen again, and what might happen in the future if certain factors are changed. Now, again, I understand there might be more of a scientific definition, but we're trying to get a broad view here. Now, I want to use this word philosophy because we're going to go here somewhere in a second. Philosophy is about explanation. Why is there gravity? Why is there light? Why is there energy? What happened to these things? Why do they exist? What's their purpose for what existence? You see, up until about 250, 300 years ago, science in the Western world was actually known as natural philosophy. It was believed that things were here for a design and for a purpose. Natural philosophy was used as a common term for studying of physics, of nature, broad terms for botany, zoology, anthropology, chemistry. And so those worlds were connected. This idea of what was there, but why it was there, and it was called natural philosophy. And then it was out of that came the age of modern science. But the amazing thing about the age of modern science was the majority of modern scientists that began modern science were followers of Christ. They were believers. Why? Because they had this worldview of what we just shared. Modern science began. I'll name a few, and then we're going to get into a couple more. Robert Boyle, Michael Faraday, Blaise Pascal, Galileo, Francis Bacon, and we're going to share a couple more. Now, I'm not here to maybe endorse their theology this morning, but what I am here is to say that modern science came originally from a Christian worldview and a Christian perspective. It was never meant to be separated, but it was meant to be integrated as a part of the Christian walk and the Christian faith. Let's look again. Let's go to Kepler. Kepler here was a German astronomer, mathematician, astrologer, natural philosopher, again, kind of combining those together, and a writer of music. He is the key figure in the 17th century scientific revolution, best known for his laws on planetary motion. He says this, I love this: I wanted to become a theologian for a long time. I was unhappy. Now behold, God is praised by my work, even in astronomy. He said it was through astronomy that he had a better understanding of who God was. And that is totally clear. Why? Go back to Psalm 19. This is his craftsmanship. They speak words of who God is. And they can be discovered, and the more we discover them, the more we can have an understanding of who God is. Let's go to Isaac Newton. Mathematician, physicist, astronomer, alchemist, theologian, widely recognized as one of the greatest mathematicians and physicists of all time, among the most influential scientists. Now, what do we know of Newton's one of his greatest discoveries? Gravity, right? So if I go like this, I go right to the ground. I don't float. Thank you. We're not floating in here this morning and banging heads. Now, did he create gravity? No, but he discovered it. But did you know, even though it's not all published, Isaac Newton had more written on theology than he did any other subject in his life? For him, it wasn't separate, gravity and his faith. They were integrated. Because of God created gravity, thank God, right? Now, we can go another direction this morning in this talk. We could talk about all the things that point to a creator. We can go that direction this morning. We really can. About how the earth in our solar system is the only planet that's inhabitable. Is that by chance? Or if you walked across an ocean and you come up upon the sand and you saw a name, Mandy loves Steve, would you think that the waves had caused that? We can point to those things of intelligent and designed by a creator, but we're not going to go that way. But for Newton, those things made his faith stronger and not to be split apart. Let's go to Copernicus, Renaissance polymath, active mathematician, astronomer, part of the Catholic who formulated a model of the universe that placed the sun rather than the earth as its center. He says this, Copernicus, to know the mighty works of God, to comprehend his wisdom and majesty and power, to appreciate in degree the wonderful workings of his laws. Surely all this must be pleasing and acceptable mode of worship to the Most High, to whom ignorance cannot be more grateful than knowledge. For Copernicus, one of his favorite verses I came to discover was Proverbs 2, 4 through 6. He says this. This is talking of wisdom now. And so in his mind, he says, if I discover things through science, that's a way that God gives us wisdom in our lives. Search for them as you would for silver. Seek for them like hidden treasures. Then you will understand what it means to fear the Lord, and you will gain knowledge of God. And so Copernicus is basically like, when the more science discovery I do, the more smaller I am as a person, the more I realize life's not about me, and how amazing God is. For the Lord grants wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Pretty amazing there. Let's go to Lord Kelvin. Scottish-Irish physicist William Thomson, better known as Lord Kelvin, was one of the most eminent scientists of the 19th century and is best known today for inventing the international system of absolute temperature that bears his name. Kelvin says this, the more thoroughly I conduct scientific research, the more I believe that science excludes atheism. So, I'm sharing with you this morning that what we know of modern science came out of a Christian worldview that was put together, natural philosophy, the Christian faith, became a little bit more branched out into a scientific modern science, and it began with believers saying this is a deeper way to understand the things of God through these methods. Now again, we could get into other talks this morning about is certain science ethical or not, and that's not the direction we're going either. There's all these different components and pieces we have to this morning that we could go off or we could talk about. But the big thing to realize is we are grounded in our faith. What is truth? When you have a conversation about someone with science, you can say, well, how did it begin? Where did it start from? You know, oftentimes when we get into arguments with people or we talk with people, you know, we talk about the here and now, but I believe in this case it's good to look back to say, how did it begin? And when we see how it began, that's when we can see how it connects to being integrated with the Christian faith. Now, as we know, there are scientists who weren't necessarily believers, and they came up with different scientific theories or thoughts. But the thing I realized was this: it always came back to their worldview. Always. One of the most famous ones would be Charles Darwin. And Darwin says something like this: an agnostic would be the more correct description of my mind. A person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God or anything beyond material phenomena. A person who claims neither faith nor disbelief in God. So this is where Darwin was functioning out of. He was functioning out of his worldview. He says this: I came to see that the Old Testament, from its manifestly false history of the world, with the Tower of Babel, the rainbow as a sign, and etc. Now, you might be sitting in here this morning, and maybe you think the same thing about the Old Testament. Just a bunch of stories, allegories. I would say it's a worldview issue. What you believe to be true of God. But also that affects how you interact in the world around you, especially with current issues that take place. Let's go to a little bit more recently. I think it was about 2015, this man named Jerry Coyne wrote a book called Faith versus Fact: Why Science and Religion Are Incompatible. So I began to look through this man's research to see, can I find in Jerry Coyne anywhere a worldview issue? I'm not concerned with what he's saying about science and faith. I want to see, does he have a worldview issue? I don't know this man. I'm not speaking against him, but this is a book that is recently published, and this is where I found in his worldview. He says this: he's clear that to understand the cosmos, there is no need for a creator. That's a worldview issue. He also says that faith at times motivates people to do good things. It does not outweigh the harm it causes. For Jerry Coyne, this came down to a worldview issue, his worldview. And that's where the ultimate debate of Christianity and science comes down to, is a worldview issue. So what's your worldview? I don't know where you work. It's not a lie. I'd lie. I know where most of you work, but I don't know all your backgrounds. I don't know all your education. And you might be sitting here saying, I struggle with the integration of. That could be across the board. But I want to challenge our worldviews. What do we ultimately believe to be true of God? And how does that integrate into the world around us? Again, when I began to dive into this, the thing I began to discover was how much modern science was actually rooted in the Christian faith. And how it was out of a Christian worldview came modern science. If the more people could discover the things of God through these methods and methodologies, it gave us a greater understanding of the Creator himself. So what's your worldview? What do you believe to be true of the world around you? And where does that come from? Oftentimes our experiences can shape our worldview, maybe more than the Bible does. Who we interact with or what we watch can shape our worldview. But as followers of Christ, a really great overarching thing to this series that we have been a part of is this: that the Word of God is fundamentally important to our worldview. It's the absolute for our worldview. And if it doesn't begin in the Word of God, that's a slippery slope to begin with. So where does your worldview fit? As we start to round the corner to a close, I want to add a couple things that we must include, I believe, in our worldview that I really haven't thought about. Well, some of it I've thought about a little bit. But I want to add a couple to our worldview this morning to help us solidify this. The first one is HyperNatural Miracles. That God uses natural law and phenomena in the extraordinary way, timing, location, magnitude, and selectivity to bring about his will. These things fit into the laws of science, but are exceptionally unusual. For instance, the 10 plagues in the Old Testament, when Moses and the people are in Egypt, and there's 10 plagues. The Red Sea could possibly be a hypernatural miracle. Elijah, he brings fire down from heaven in the Old Testament. It could be a hypernatural miracle. So when anything with a worldview begins this way, we must ask ourselves, where then can we find it in the Bible? So let's look at a couple. Psalm 104 verse 4 says, "The winds are your messengers, and flames of fire are your servants." That God uses the things that he created, the natural order that he created, to bring about his purposes. Psalm 148, with the typo up there, 7 through 8 says, "Praise the Lord from the earth, you creatures of the ocean depths, fire and hail, snow and clouds, wind and weather that obey him." Let's bring this one step further. Something that I've probably read 8,000 times, but never looked at it this way. Let's go back to the story of the Red Sea. Moses is bringing the people. If you don't know the story, he's leading people out of bondage in a place called Egypt, and he gets to this Red Sea, and he's being chased down by his enemies. What do? Do we all just jump in and swim? Probably hard with everything that they had. God provides a way. He splits the Red Sea. Now, I was actually watching something a couple weeks ago that said there's a part of the Red Sea that actually has a heightened piece to it that isn't as deep as the other pieces, that if they walked across, it would have been more of a natural bridge or a road across the Red Sea. But check this out from Exodus chapter 14, verse 21. Oftentimes, we focus on Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened the path through the water. We usually look at that. But how did it happen? With a strong east wind that blew all night, turning the seabed into dry land. So this will be considered a hypernatural miracle. Is it rare? Yeah, it's probably rare for wind to do such things. But I could begin to think about it a little bit. If you go to Oneida Lake here, and not too far from here, there's pieces of Oneida Lake that even out in the middle are very shallow. And Oneida Lake has a lot of boats that capsize because when the wind picks up, the waves really get going on that lake because of how shallow it is. So if there was a strong enough wind that came through, realistically, it could begin to spread the water in that way. It's a hypernatural miracle, we would consider it, but God uses natural things to cause things to take place. The other one, though, where we can say, we might like a sermon like this because we can say, yeah, this is something I can grasp, or this is something I can hold on to, or I have to see to believe it, or I have to be able to grasp something firm. But the Christian faith ultimately always leads to, we have a God who can't be bound in an experiment. He can't be held in a hand. He's supernatural. God operates outside of natural law. And one of the stories my mind goes to is from Matthew chapter 8, verse 27. And the wind and the seas are blowing, and Jesus says, "Stop." And the disciples look at him and they say, "Who is this man? Who is this man? Who are you?" I mean, they've been traveling with Jesus for this period of time, and the more they see Jesus work, the more they're like, "Dude, who is this guy? This doesn't make any sense to me." That for us to see, we have, yes, a rational and orderly God that we can see through science, but ultimately we have a God that cannot be contained to anything. We have a Jesus who can walk on water if he so chooses to. We have a Jesus who can take a person that no other medical doctor can heal and heal that person after laying on their legs for 30 plus years. Because he can do anything he chooses to. The Bible ultimately says we walk by faith, not by sight. So science helps ground us in our faith. But our worldview, to be fully rounded, we must hold on to something and saying, who is this man? I've never known anything like this in my life. Who can take a heart and transform it? Scientific experiment can't do that, but Jesus can. And so it's the balance of both. that yes, we do live in a order-filled world that can be rational and we can discover things of God, but there is something of God himself that should leave our heads scratching and saying, I just don't get it. Because he's God. His ways are not our ways. His mind is not our mind. And he is above all and should leave our heads scratching as Christians sometimes. Who is this man? But here's what happens. We oftentimes might go more towards the science-based stuff, right? Let's take a for instance. You get a headache, you go take a science. It's called aspirin or Tylenol, right? Do we run to the who is this man first to heal that, right? We often will go to one side because we can hold on to it. But how much are we living in the I'm willing to take a risk of, because who is this man? Easy when I can see it. Not so much when I have to believe. I believe he wants both in our life. The order, the rational of discovering who he is, but there's something of Jesus, that he was willing to take your place on the cross, to die the death you deserved, because the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. Who is this guy that he'd be willing to die for me, to give his life up for me? That is the man that we can't fit into a scientific discovery or evidence based on a methodology, but should leave our heads scratching. Who is this man?